Good afternoon. Welcome to another Elite EDM style session with myself, Darren Baton. This afternoon we're going to cover about how to program pads, Anthem Style Pads in your mix with the synthesis. This is the last but one. I'm just going to check a few things here, guys, as well, because it says my chat is disconnected, but oh, that's YouTube's problem. Yeah, so we're going to be covering pads today, how to program pads and things like that. So bear with me a few seconds. I'm just getting a little bit organised on the screen in the background. And so if you're new to the channel, welcome. I will say, don't smash the like button, because if you smash it, that's internet abuse. Just give us a nice easy thumbs up, a nice like, that would be great. Subscribe to the channel, share the channel. We've got a few things coming in over the next few weeks. I'm going to start bringing this how to develop your own music style to an end with the synthesis side of things. We're going to be covering pads today, chords next week, Rhodes chords and pianos, so Rhodes sort of type chords and how to program those sounds. And that brings us to the end of the music style side of things, and then we're going to be covering effects, so how to program sort of different types of effects like sirens and things like that, and noise effects and LFO controlled effects. Today's session is focused around Pigment, sponsored by Theor. So most of the synthesis programming today will be using that plugin, Theor plugin. I'm going to make a disclaimer before I start playing, because it is quite CPU hungry, and hopefully I've turned everything off now and it will kind of play without any glitches, but I can't promise it at this stage because I've got OBS running, I've got a lot of things running in the background as well still. But I've tried to minimize my processes and so that everything runs smoothly for this session. So let's get into it. I'm just going to switch over. So let's get into the slides. We've only got 5 slides to go through today. A little bit of theory on pads. Okay, so pads are the backing sound. So pads are to the synth world what string section is to the orchestra. They primarily occupy a space in the mid-range, adding a rich tonal beat that pads out the mix. Sounds can range from smooth and warm to shimmering ghostly textures. Thanks to their strong but often subtle mid-range presence, they are ideal for mapping out a track's chord progression and reinforcing the lead. So if you're trying to start a track and you've got no ideas, maybe start with some chords from some pads. It gives you that nice rich sound to get your introduction working or a breakdown section working. Then obviously you've got a chord progression you can work from. You can create then your pianos from that. You can create your bass lines from that. Simplest pads sound come from old analog polysynths like the Roland Jupiter 8. Now I have got an example of the Jupiter 8 which I showed you last week. I'm not going to use that in today's example. I haven't got into how that's working and programming these days. I need to sit down and work that one out, but I have been doing a little bit of learning on Pigment, and it's quite a powerful synth and really simple, and I'm looking forward to it because it's very similar to Serum and very powerful sound engines. There's a lot you can do with it as well. It's very easy to use once you get into it. So to make a big pad, you need to stack several oscillators in ascending octaves and use subtle amounts of detuning and chorus ensembler effects on them to create extra width. Saw waves and square waves are both ideal oscillator candidates for this, and pads tend to fade in and often out softly, so set the volume, attack and release envelopes accordingly. You can have them instant, you can have them slightly so they're slow coming in like a string section. So in theory, we're just going to cover a little bit of theory of inversions, which helps when you're programming pads. So we're building a chord. It's normal to start with the root note, then place the fifth above, adding the third in between. Either a major or a minor supplies the emotional content. So it's your choice. So you can start with obviously your root note, stack your fifth, which would be 7 semitones up the scale, and then either use a major or minor and you can switch between that throughout the pattern as well. The next step is to experiment with the order of the notes in the chord. Instead of having the lowest note as the root, try a different one in the chord, like G, E, in the case of C major. So we've just got our notes here. That would be our fifth. So you've got C, C1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 semitones on the G, which makes it the fifth. And then we've got an inversion down on the E. We could play down the E as well. And that E could be played either 1, 2, 3, 4. You could play it in the chord in the close proximity, but in this case it's using the E on a lower inversion. And then we've also got the key there, another inversion on a G again. So we could alternate that chord and play E, G, C, or E. There's slight variations of it. So you're always just alternating the notes up and down. I'll show you some examples soon. Doing so gives inversions of the standard C chord, all of which sound different. Try placing the lead melody note at the top of a chord and then get creative with the positions of the notes below. Using inversions allows you to maintain common notes when the chord changes, keeping some held down while others shift. So you usually find that your left hand will play the root bass notes, and you can sort of play melodies across on the top. Using inversions as a whole new range of programming options and allows you to escape from the limitations of a standard chord or a standard triad chord into writing territory which new possibilities are abound. So inversions or intervals and circles of fifths, I'm just going to cover this slightly just so that you understand it a little bit. So obviously this chart is showing our perfect unison, so we start with our root note, we have our minor second and then a major second, so we're going up in intervals, so it'll be C, C sharp, D, etc, etc, one interval, two intervals, augmented second, minor third, which would be 1, 2, 3, and major third, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones up, perfect fourth, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 semitones, augmented fourth, and then we come to our diminished fifth or our perfect fifth, which would be the G, and so on and so forth. So again, just to embed this in terms of musical scale or musical notation on written score. So the C root, E is the major third, and the G is the perfect fifth. And again, if you want to look for your majors and your minors and you want to switch between a major and a relative minor, it's good to use the circle of fifths. So you can see, for example, the C. So if you had a chord of C, so C, E, G, and you wanted a relative minor of that, you look at the circle of fifth and that would be an A minor. So you're pretty much shifting down from the C, 1, 2, 3 semitones, and then you could play a minor chord from that, which would be the A, 1, 2, 3, C, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would be the E. Okay, and that would be your chord from there. So C major to an A minor, so on and so forth. So very useful to have around. What I like to do as well, I've got on the tablet, I got a chord progression app on my tablet, and I can pull up any chord progression I want to, and it gives me the starting root notes of those chord progressions, and then I can work around with that from there. It's a starting point. Sometimes I use unison MIDI as well, which is very useful because everything's there stacked in chords, and they give you all the different breakdowns of that, the augmented versions, the diminished versions, etc. Okay, so a couple of examples of pad riffs. Now, when I did these examples using again the Sample Magic book from the Secrets of House Music, they programmed this actually across one bar, the whole pattern, and it just didn't sound right. So they, in the context you'll see in a second, that they're referring to bars, but actually they'd programmed it across beats. So I've had to sort of shuffle around and spend a bit of time to understand what they'd actually done. So let's get into it. In this pattern, the chord shifts from C minor to G in 4 different ways. using inversions of the original chord. So in bar 1 it moves down, keeping the harmony notes in the same order. In bar 2 the top and the bottom notes shift. In the same order, in bar it moves. Hang on, where are we? We've lost. In bar 2 the top and the bottom notes shift, but the central notes stay the same. Yeah, in bar 3 it moves upwards slightly, keeping the G common, and in bar 4 the whole chord moves up at the same interval with the melody note at the top of the chord. If the tone of the pad is thick or buzzy, try spreading out some of the notes so that the harmony is more clearly defined, because obviously if you've got lower tone notes you're creating a lot of thick textures and it's going to be quite buzzy, especially if you're using saw waves or pulse waves. So try sort of spanning some different intervals in the chords. So the second one is the classic Moby riff. This deep, moody Moby style pattern is built around a chord progression in the key of G minor. A lower bass part plays the root note of each chord while the upper notes contribute the harmonics. It starts with a B sustain 4 chord in the first bar, which gives a feeling of slight tension. And again, in their example, they actually programmed this over 1 bar and not 2 bars. So there was a slight mismatch there in the actual printing of the MIDI. Next, the E flat slides down to the D and the bass moves to G. It creates a feeling of resolution when the bass shifts to the D. At the end, it forms a G minor inversion with the 5th at the bottom, and the new feeling of tension sets it up for the next cycle. Okay, so how to program these analog Anthem pads. We're going to walk through this programming and then walk through an example of gating it and creating some rhythm out of it, and then I will show the Ableton Live examples. It's not going to be much of a long video hopefully today, guys. I'm trying to keep these quite short and sharp for you so that you can get into the content really without me waffling on. So to make a full frequency Anthem pads, take 2 identical saw wave oscillators and detune them slightly so that they are subtly breathe. Now the beauty of Pigment by Theor is that you can really get into the fine tuning with either fine tune or you can tune the oscillator instead, which gives it a slightly different type of detune, and it's really useful for creating some nice textures. Secondly, you add a square wave on the 3rd oscillator an octave above, which you can see there in the example in the image above. Set the volume to 50% and the other 2 oscillators to full, and then set the amp envelope attack to 0, decay and sustain to 100, and release to 50%. Then secondly, we modulate the pulse width of the square wave on oscillator 3 with a sine shaped LFO, and this is one of the reasons I picked Pigment, because it's very good for this kind of stuff. It's really easy to set up an LFO and assign the depth how much you want really quickly, and I'll show you that. Set the speed to around 1/4 note and increase the depth until it begins to shimmer. Increase the brightness by adding a little resonance and position the cutoff point somewhere near maximum. So on old analog synths, they have various unison, chorus and ensemble functions, which we've kind of covered over the last few weeks, which can be be activated to get an even wider sound and detuned sound. With Pigment, it's very CPU and very RAM hungry, so be careful when you're stacking more voices. It can sort of start to chunk away at your RAM. If you do get a good sound, you might want to sort of imprint it down to audio in just 1 note and then put that into a sampler, or so you can play chords again, or you might just want to bounce the whole chord structure down to a piece of audio so you can save your CPU, or maybe just freeze the track as well if you want to go back and make edits later on. But yeah, very hungry, very CPU and RAM hungry. So switch on your equivalent and then increase the depth of the pulse width modulation and LFO speed for additional additional width, and then lay down a simple chord sequence which triggers on every beat and follows a C minor chord progression. And you could stack the root notes followed by the 5th and the octave on top, and add a simple melody line on top for additional character, and make the whole pad throb by adding a heavy linked sidechain compression. In my example, I've just done the example that's above. I haven't stacked any lower octaves yet, but we'll go through these examples shortly. So the second part is to, rather than having pads sitting in the mix and just taking up all of the bottom end, we will sometimes want to make them gated, make them move with a kick drum with some compression, or gate the actual sound to create a rhythmic pattern like a trance pad, etc., or an R&B gated type pad sound. So pad sounds are associated with washy textures, but by adding a noise gate, the signal path can become part of the rhythm section. Triggering the noise gate allows you to shape the volume of the pad in tight formation without re-triggering its own envelopes or interfering with evolving textures essentials to the pad's character. So if you imagine that you're going to want to restart your notes and make a sort of gated pattern, every time you hit a new MIDI note on your synth, it's got to restart the envelope, the oscillator, the generators, the attack, the envelopes, and that can put a lot of power and resources again onto your computer. The notes may have too much release and they wash over too much, so they won't sort of gate and cut out. So doing this, you add a gate on with a pad line playing, set up a separate trigger track with a basic synth. It could be anything, just a short preset sound, short and snappy, with attack, instant attack and decay. Now strap a noise gate across the pad on your track and open the noise gate sidechain function and route the trigger track to the input, and then turn off the output of the trigger track so it isn't heard in the mix. And you can see that's what I've done in the example above. Then program a note sequence on the trigger track. It doesn't matter what note it is, it's just a trigger. It's acting as a short MIDI trigger. Treat the length just like a regular MIDI note, and this will affect the time of the noise gate stays open for. So imagine you're trying to create a rhythmical pattern in MIDI and then apply it to the gate. Start with short 16ths so that the gate triggers for 32 note durations. This gives a regular pattern throughout the bar. So by default, the gate will have a simple on-off shape. So open the attack and or release to soften the decay, and in this case you need to control the hold as well. And there's a few other parameters by adjusting your threshold and also your return. You need to get these balances right, otherwise you won't get the gated signal how you want it. But I'll show you that in the example coming up. So increase it with increasing it will let a little of the original drive signal through, and this can be used to soften the gate in effect. So yeah, sorry, the last control is the reduction level. It's worth like a Wetton control, so the gain reduction level, like the threshold and the return levels, and that's what we're gonna come on to now. So just quickly, next session I'm going to be covering Soulful Roads, the deep sound, and I'll be covering how to produce house chords and using sevenths and ninths and beyond. So we'll go into the actual synth anatomy again of programming a Rhodes organ sound, and then we'll show you the chords and stacking up ninths and sevenths, etc. Maybe 13ths as well. And then we start a new section in this, and that'll start to bring us to a close on developing your own sound. I might do some stuff on vocals as well. I wanted to try and keep this in the same theme, how to develop your own style and how electronic music style, because all of these techniques I've been delivering can be applied to any style of music. It doesn't have to be just house music. The synth anatomy and the music and structure and the chords are the same. It's just the tempo of the music that you work in. And we'll also start to show a few examples in the coming weeks. I'll show you how to take a hip-hop track and turn it into a house track. So let's get into the examples. It looks like my chat is not connecting today, so unfortunately guys, the chat is not live on the channel. But let's get into the examples, and I'm going to turn my send here off so I can get a little bit more real estate. And I've got a couple of the examples here from the slides, and then I've got a couple of examples here of the pad from the slides and the trigger. It's creating the trigger, and all I'm using here is a muted guitar for that trigger. So let's get into the pads first. This is how the examples in the actual book looked across one bar, and that just doesn't sound right. It's too quick unless you want that sort of quickness in the pads. So secondly, I programmed them across 1 bar, 2, 3 and 4 bars. So if I just play you these, I'm going to have to turn pigment on. Just make sure we've got a sound generator. I'm not sure what these are actually in terms of pad sounds. It may have reset itself, because actually what I was doing earlier on was actually inside here, and I was coming into the tutorials, and if you go into tutorials and through here, it starts to bring you into different sound generation tutorials, and I found some really cool ways of programming sound just by following their guides. So let's just play this through. I'm not sure if it is a pad sound. I may have to program the pad. We have to drop it onto the pad I've actually programmed. So bear with me. Sorry guys, there's just something not quite playing right here. There's a few things open that shouldn't be playing, and I don't know what's going on with it. It shouldn't be playing those two sounds. So let me just solo these. Okay, so you can see what I did there. I kind of just stacked this oscillator down 12 just to give a bit more warmth in there. I literally programmed these this morning, so I'm still getting the sounds right in the pads I was trying to create, but I'm pretty much there. I've got just 3 saws stacked up, and there's not much programming going on in there. There's a bit of unison here on the super, and I want to show you all of this stuff as well. And I'm going to show you how I program the next pad from scratch. Oops, sorry guys, I think my microphone was off again then. And again, apologies for my microphone being off to start the last week's session. So yeah, just looking at these pads, I've got just a basic stack of saws going on, and I just detuned this one slightly. So there's not much going on in terms of actual production and the synthesis. It's just basic stacking of saws, and I was controlling the pads. We really can get into this. We've got this nice unison super mode. I'm just going to play this through and make a few changes to the pads, and then we'll go into the next example and the gating example. Okay, so that shows you the different variations of the unison, and this is why it's so such a good synthesizer, to be honest with you. I've literally took the time this morning to actually start to learn this. I'm halfway through learning the engines, the different engines. We've got different types of engines in this. We can put a sample engine in, analog, wavetable, sample, harmonics. But I'm going to be doing dedicated videos on these. We're going to do a dedicated live session on some of the Theor plugins over the coming weeks, and then I'm actually doing a dedicated series for the Academy, which will probably become a subscription series, which will be a lot more in depth, going over how to program this Theor synth in a lot more detail. So I'm just taking the time to do that. What I'll be doing in the live session is just covering the plugins and going through some of their best features and things like that, and then, as I say, providing an actual course for programming these individually. So let's move on to the next example. Again, I just wanted to also mention a bit of fine tuning I could have done here on the oscillator, so let me just run through that and show you that example. Okay, so that just shows you, I was working in this example with just one oscillator, and that was just a saw wave. So literally in a saw wave and all of that super mix on the unison, and a bit of detuning and stereo to make fatten out sounds. So you can see what you can do with pretty much just one oscillator and a unison, and I actually just bought the detuning on that, and it made it sound wide anyway. And the chords, obviously playing the notes higher up on the octave on the scale in the keyboard, that will introduce those higher harmonics as well. So, you know, obviously stacking these extra sounds in, that's what I've done, and that's on the next example as well. So I just wanted to show you that. So let's move on to this next example. And what I've got here again is another pigment. I've gone through the oscillators. I've got two saw waves up full, pretty much the same setup as the last sound we were just looking at. I've actually named this Anthem Analog Pads, and if you look at my little sound here, I've actually named this here. I'm starting to build my own sort of sound bank of packs for the Academy. So I'm going to sort of build a pigment sound bank, which will be probably on offer with some of our courses and stuff like that as well. I'm going to do a few free sound banks, and then we're going to develop some over time. But yeah, all I've got is a bit of detuning here, fine tune. I've got the classic mode on the chorus, but again I'm going to show you the difference playing around with it to get some nice tonal effects. It's pretty much the same. There's some FM. We can put FM on or take it off. You can sync these oscillators as well. And really easy to use. What I've got here is on this sine wave, I've got this modulating here. So if I click on the LFO, you'll see this is assigned here, and we can assign any LFO just by coming to our LFO, LFO 1 here, and we've got 3 LFOs we can use for control. So specifically this LFO is on the width, and if I click on the LFO here, you'll see the bridge, and I just assign it 2 different ways. I can assign the depth. The depth is one way, look, so I've got 2 different ways. It can be a positive or a negative, so it's a negative setting in depth, and that's a positive setting, and that controls the LFO on this waveform. From here I've changed the rate sync, and again I love this. You can got the control from hertz, binary, sync by triplets or dotted as well, so you can get some really good rhythmic patterns from your LFO. So let me come into the sound and I'll show you this, and I'm going to take the gate off as well, so we're just going to take all the sidechain off. Okay guys, so this is what I'm on about when it can get really heavy, the number of voices and the unison. You can see it's really taking some CPU. I've had to turn off the other synths, and I've got a really powerful computer, and you can see it's still, I'm using 43% because I'm running OBS software, I'm running Ableton, I've got these synths open. It really is starting to take away my RAM and CPU. I have got a fair bit of RAM. I've still got 11 gig available at this stage. You know, it does start chunking away when you start doing some of the synth programming, especially when you start playing, stacking up sounds. So yeah, you can see as I'm starting to play, it's starting to glitch, starting to crack and pop. It's a lot of power going on, but what I'm trying to show is, can you see the LFO here syncing? So again, if I click on my LFO here, I can control my depth from here, or I can obviously control the depth from here. I can go into a negative, and you can see that chaining on the same chain here. We've also got an actual really cool function. There's a side chain built into the LFO, and we could start using a side chain, other things to control that LFO and side chain, the LFO, which I think is really cool. I'm yet to discover how to work this yet. I'm still working through the tutorials, but I will obviously, when we do the full videos, I will hopefully have discovered all of this. But yeah, it's really easy to use, as I say guys. This is literally just one sound engine, just one analog sound engine, and I could start stacking up some utilities, wavetables, but in these terms mostly pads are just analog. So obviously I've got on this, I've got the sidechain. Okay, so that was the gated pad, and I'm just going to run through how this was set up again. So obviously we've got pigment, compressor sidechaining, and the pad. So you turn your sidechain on, it's triggering from the pad trigger, and again you can control how much it goes in the mix as well, gain, how much it affects it, and the most important controls are the threshold and the return and the attack, and again the hold and release. And just quickly going to mention on my sidechain here, I'm sidechaining from the actual beat, so I haven't got a kick drum, I'm just using the actual beat. But to solo the lower frequencies of the kick out, I'm using the filter, so I'm using the EQ, and I've just adjusted this around so I can just get most of the kick drums. And you'll see on the sidechain that most of the kick drums are playing. If I change this, you'll see the kick drum pattern start to change. Okay, so that's yeah, I think that sort of wraps pretty much up this whole thing. But the trigger, and then again, don't forget to turn your trigger off. And the MIDI trigger is just pretty much that. So obviously what I've done is programmed 16 notes and then just dragged them back to create that gate. Otherwise, if they're full notes and a legato, you're not going to get that space. You want the notes to actually trigger and open and close and the gate. So that's all it's doing. This MIDI trigger is pretty much just sending straight to here, and I'm controlling that with the threshold and also the return. The return is important, letting the signal back through of how it's almost acting like the gate on an arpeggiator. It sort of controls and opens and closes the gate, and how much signal is being sort of returned back through. Once you've set your threshold level, the return brings the signal, how much signal is coming through, and you can see when I adjust that has an impact here between these two bars here, and that's just sending the signal through. And obviously attack is allowing instant signal to come through, but controlling the attack, the hold and release stops it just creating that on and off effect, and it just helps you to round off the edges of the sound. You will hear clicks coming through because you're using a sidechain trigger, and sometimes that will pop into the mix, but with everything else in the mix you won't actually physically hear that. And again, there's other ways of getting around that as well. You know, you could print it to audio like I've done here. All I've done to put it to audio is just created another track. I've turned my input on from pigments here, the track I want to record, and I just hit record, and it just captures the audio, and you can see it's literally captured them with the gates how I want them perfectly. And you see they're not quite bang on the nose, and that's purely because of the actual triggering that's going on. It could be also a slight latency delay internally from the synth playing, so ideally what I would want is maybe to put my audio piece there and then set one from here, and that starts my audio sample, and that should bring everything back into time. As you can see there, the note is started pretty much on the down of every beat. There's only slight variations, and again we could just bring it back into line, but you'll find it's pretty much in time once you've ripped it from or resampled itself. And the reason I'm doing that, because if I've got resampling, you can resample, but resampling is going to resample the entire master out of the track, and that might not be with the thing that you actually want. You know, if you're bouncing the stem down for example, you want like a kick drum. The way I used to create, for example, I used to create my sub mix before I started using a sub channel to actually bounce, to put my kick and my bass and stuff through and put a filter on it. What I used to do to create that sort of low subby club nightclub effect, like you're inside the toilets, or and when you open the door it gets louder. To create that effect, what I used to do was to basically bounce the whole track down as a piece of audio, and then just put a filter on it that way, and I'd just sort of stem it down another track. I'd bounce my whole track down to a piece of audio, and then just do a cut, post edit, and knock it down and drop it down and filter it, and then I could just reset the filters on and on. without having the filters swooping up and down, because sometimes if you are doing it in real time and the filters don't reset quick enough, it creates it sort of sweeps and whooshes over the resonance of the sound. It might be the effect that you want, but sometimes it's not. So the easiest way to do it is to actually bounce the track down to the whole track to audio, or what I do is use a resampling, and I'll just bounce down another piece of audio and put it into the track as I'm actually making the track. So it's like sort of post-production techniques, but in pre-production, if that makes sense. So it used to be, for me, it was a post-production technique. So I'd make the track and then I'd do the edits and the filters where I want to, and that was purely like on the old synths, the old computers when I used to use Cubase and stuff, and the filters didn't used to reset enough quick enough. So, but Ableton's brilliant, everything resets really quickly. So, you know, your production techniques change over time. A lot of the techniques I used to do years ago, I still incorporate the actual the groundwork, the theory, the theory of it, but the actual production techniques that I used to create on the samplers and with synths, I don't do that anymore so much, because I've just developed different techniques inside Ableton and try different things, and think some things work for you, some things stick in the mind more than other techniques that you use, and what this has done for me, guys, as well, I'm really enjoying delivering this content, because it's taking all the stuff I've learned over the last 27 years and all of the books I read when I was at university, and it's sort of refreshing everything for me as well. So I'm really enjoying delivering this content for you, and I'm enjoying synth design again and sound design, and I'm really getting back into the techniques that are helping my music stand out better in terms of mixing. So it's good to sort of do this stuff, come away from it, and then come back to it again and relearn and re-watch the videos, relearn techniques. You know, there's no right and wrong way of doing things, but it's good to have the embedded theory. And what you find is, like I say, for me, what it's doing now is putting those pieces back together. So there's techniques that I forget about, but now I'm introducing them because I'm actually teaching you guys and relaying the content through, and sort of putting my spin onto it, which not all the stuff in the book is brilliant, and some of it I've had to sort of make some adaptations to it, the synthesis, etc., the sound design. But yeah, it's all sort of enjoyable stuff, and obviously I'm trying to deliver the best I can to give you the base fundamentals of synthesis, sound design, music theory, and developing your own style. So hope that's helpful. If you've got any questions, please leave some on the comments. Give us a like, subscribe as well, and obviously share the content if you've got friends who are enjoying stuff or just learning, want to learn. That's what we're here for. I'm more than happy to answer questions. So yeah, hopefully next week, I think what I might do is I might do a session early on Thursday to finish off this music road session, and then we can start moving on to sound effects on the Friday session. So yeah, I might do 2 sessions next week. I'm wrapping up currently the videos. I'm doing post-production of all the videos. I've recorded 28 videos. I've got to redo 5 of them where things have either gone wrong or the computer's glitching on the sound, etc. So that's me finishing off the course hopefully in the next few weeks. And so I'm sort of running short of days and hours, really, guys. There's not enough days and hours in the week to get all this stuff done, but I'm trying to sort of keep on top of this and do at least 1 hour's worth of content for you guys every week. So yeah, that sort of wraps it up, I think, and I'm going to go and jump onto Facebook now and sort of do a recap video on our Facebook channel. If you haven't checked that out, go and check it out. So I post on there weekly updates of what I've done on here, and sort of just cross promoting the channels, really. So that's me done, and I'll leave you guys to have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Take care.